Hey y'all, it's Lauren. We started the season with a story about two Black farmers working together to bring beauty and healthy food to their community. But then, the demolition of vacant homes near their farm put them at risk for respiratory problems. In the St. Louis region, there are so many other stories about how environmental racism impacts everyday people and their health, housing, and daily lives. Which is why this season, we will use the Washington University Interdisciplinary Environmental Law Clinic's report on environmental racism in St. Louis to guide us through conversations about the top environmental issues facing the most vulnerable communities in St. Louis. The Environmental Racism in St. Louis report was released in 2019 with the help of multiple grassroots organizations across the region, and Tara Roque, Assistant Professor of Practice and Assistant Director for the Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic, says that Blake Strode, the Executive Director of Arch City Defenders, a St. Louis-based holistic legal advocacy organization, initially brought the idea to them.
And asked about research into environmental justice, and asked if there had been a report on environmental justice issues in the St. Louis region. And we looked, and there hadn't been any. There was no comprehensive report on the issues. So he asked us to do it. And they brought together a group of 4 local nonprofits came together: Dutchtown South Community Corporation, Arch City Defenders, Action St. Louis, and the Missouri chapter of the Sierra Club all came together, and the students did a lot of the research, and together we put together the report.
We were also able to speak to Catherine Finnerson, an organizer for Action St. Louis, and Madison Orozco, Community Collaborations Associate for Arch City Defenders, about the importance of working on the Environmental Racism Report. And Catherine says the mission of Action St. Louis is the reason why it made sense for them to be involved in compiling a report that directly affects the communities they serve.
Action St. Louis, we exist to build a future where every Black life can thrive and where our communities are free of oppressive institutions that have caused us harm. And again, it was founded by activists, politicized after the killing of Mike Brown and the Ferguson uprising. So we are constantly fighting to build power for Black people in St. Louis. The report outlines environmental injustices, but the injustices actually disproportionately endanger public health for people of color and low-income individuals in St. Louis. And this is the work that we do. We are all about, empowering and assisting the most marginalized people in St. Louis, which are Black people. And this coincides exactly with the type of work that we do. And environmental racism fits right into that.
Even though Arch City Defenders is a legal advocacy organization, Madison says their holistic approach is the reason why they wanted to get involved with the report.
That means that we're working with, direct representation, yes, and civil rights litigation, yes, but then also media policy and advocacy work, and then community collaborations work, which is the department that I'm a part of. And that is really about building partnerships that are working to change St. Louis, building partners that are working to really address, the issues and the things that the people, that we're representing are facing, the people like those who we're representing are facing. And so, the environmental justice work is just really part of this community collaborations and building partnerships. And we just recognize that all of this is so connected.
Action St. Louis and Arch City Defenders were just 2 of the 4 local nonprofits working on the report, with their main focus being community outreach and engagement. Catherine says coalition building and collaboration is important in change-making work.
When we work together in these organizations, there's always, a plan, but we never forget about the people that we're fighting for. And, so when we get community engagement, it's going to take all of us to engage the community. It's going to take all of these organizations to let people know that there are people, on their team. So I think that's one of the reasons why, you can't handle something as big as this and something as systemic as this and by ourselves. So we're always about building and collaborating.
And the dedicated students at Washington University's Interdisciplinary Environmental Law Clinic are pushing everyone to work together to make St. Louis an environmentally friendly place to live.
We kind of come back together semester after semester to work with students from the clinic, and there's always this kind of renewed sense of understanding of this is why we're all here together, and this is what we want to accomplish together, and we need each other because we all bring different strengths, we all bring different skill sets, different knowledge, different ability, and so it's just being together on that team that makes us all stronger.
The report was released toward the end of 2019, and in the following year, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated environmental issues and put a sense of urgency behind tackling them. Tara points to the differences in how white and black people live in St. Louis as an example of why it is important to pay attention to the information they released just months before the pandemic hit.
Well, if you've looked into, there have been a lot of studies done as of late about the interaction between environmental racism and COVID. And the fact of the matter is that Black people all over the country, but and frankly, a lot in St. Louis have been being infected at rates higher than white people. The severity has been higher with Black people than white people, and they've been dying at significantly higher rates than white people. And that is because long-term exposure to air pollution, to mold, to lead, to all of this stuff has left people in a weakened state. Their bodies are less able to handle respiratory diseases. People who aren't healthy are less able to handle getting sick. Their bodies are less able to recover from getting sick, and they're less able to handle pathogens or new diseases like COVID. So we've set a system where a certain subset of people in this city are less healthy and less able to handle things like COVID, and it's not fair, frankly. But it's not only just the disease itself, even if you take into account the different ways that white people and Black people live in the city of St. Louis.
And the different ways whites and blacks live in St. Louis are clearly shown through the sacrifices people have had to make in order to stay employed during this time.
And I've been working from home. I have a nice home to live in. I'm able to do my job through a computer, and I've been able to keep myself safe. I'm not a frontline worker. I'm not an essential worker. I'm able to keep myself safe. So many people aren't. And when you even considering, so there's a disparity there, but there's also another disparity. Those people that are staying home, if you're staying home in a house where your neighborhood is surrounded by illegal dumping, vacant properties, where your home has lead or mold or what have you in it, that's where you're staying. That's where you're going on walks, the non-existent parks. It leads to disparities. I mean, obviously disparities, but disparities complicate the disparities, which complicate the disparities, and it builds on itself, and it creates an untenable situation for a large subset of people in this city.
The Environmental Racism in St. Louis report puts a face to those disparities, and the research collected with nonprofits like the Sierra Club and Dutchtown South Community Corporation show a clear need for environmental justice work. So in this episode, we look back at how St. Louis's history of systemic racism has impacted the living environments of low-income and minority residents, how the report features stories of everyday people, and what type of environment the report's recommendations could create for the next generation. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here.
Hey everyone, it's Jalian. The term environmental racism was coined by Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., a civil rights activist and former executive director of the United Church of Christ's Commission for Racial Justice. In the 80s, he led the commission when it authored a landmark report entitled Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States, which was the first national study to examine the connection between race and exposure to toxic waste. The report found that after controlling for income and geographic factors, race was still the best predictor of the location of commercial hazardous waste facilities and uncontrolled toxic waste sites, which were more likely to be placed in Black and Brown communities. It included a list of 10 cities with the highest percentage of Black people, and highest number of toxic waste sites. St. Louis was number 2 on that list, as a region where close to 28% of the population was Black, and there were 160 uncontrolled toxic waste sites. Reverend Dr. Chavis has said that environmental racism is an issue of life and death, and organizers like Catherine of Action St. Louis agree.
When you know that you have a place like St. Louis specifically, where we have the Del Mar Divide, when you know that there are practices that have been put in place to ensure that things such as housing, the way neighborhoods look, even the way that you can breathe are better in areas that are occupied by white people. And when you have put measures and systems in place to ensure that that continues to happen, that to me is what environmental racism is. When you set out to specifically and purposefully defund areas, when you disinvest in areas, when you commit food apartheid, when you take things that people need, just basic needs like fresh vegetables and fresh fruits out of areas and make it difficult for certain people based on their color and race to obtain those rights that we think are just basic human rights. That is environmental racism. Environmental justice is the continued fight to undo these systemic issues that have taken place, when the constant fight and the constant struggle to make sure that this doesn't continue for our children and our grandchildren.
Catherine explains that the stakes are high for Black people who are fighting to disrupt St. Louis's centuries-long legacy of systemic racism and structural inequality.
There's a vastly different quality of life for Black St. Louis's versus white St. Louis. Unfortunately, St. Louis ranks highest in the most negative statistics, even when it comes to police brutality committed against Black bodies, when it comes to housing, when it comes to things as bail and bond, the way that we do these systems. And these things have been staunchly in place. It's like begrudgingly, it's like a constant fight for just little steps of improvement. And at this time, we have determined that the status quo, we can't tolerate it anymore. It's unsustainable because the quality of life for Black people here is vastly different. And we know that we pretty much are fighting for our lives here in St. Louis against racism and inequality. We need to just be an example of things that can change or things that we can fight to do here, because this city really has been just ravaged by racism and unbridled capitalism. And I think we are at a point where we definitely need to let people know that this isn't something that can continue here. And we're not going to allow it.
Tara points out that especially in St. Louis, quality of life is directly and visibly linked to structural racism.
If you match up the redlining maps with maps of poverty, or with maps of lead poisoning, or with maps of asthma rates, you will see that the redlining maps almost line up very nearly identically with these areas that are suffering disproportionately from environmental injustices now.
She adds that even after redlining was outlawed, consultants and city officials still considered investing in some areas of the city while leaving others behind.
If you look back at the Team 4 report, when a group of consultants came and said St. Louis is losing population, we're losing money, the best thing to do is to stop investing in North City, said that it's just not cost efficient or whatever to invest in North City. And it was effectively to let it die on the vine. Do no harm, but do no good either.
The report that Tara is referring to was released by a consulting company called Team 4 back in the mid-70s. It was entitled Citywide Implementation Strategies, the Draft Comprehensive Plan, and outlined ways to prioritize investment and address population loss in the city. The report designated neighborhoods where residents were more likely to be older, poor, and Black as so-called depletion areas. and the consultants recommended that city officials institute a no-growth policy for those neighborhoods until there was a broad public commitment to rebuilding those areas. More specifically, they suggested that major capital investments, such as new streets, schools, community centers, and housing, be put off until the city decided that it was time to completely redevelop those areas. The consultants and city officials who backed the plan got a lot of flack from Black activists and community members like Percy Green.
And then the report was decried as racist, and it supposedly was not followed. But if you look at what happened in North St. Louis, there has not been much investment in there. And right now we're in a situation where Black children are 2.4 times more likely to suffer of lead poisoning. 70% of all kids with lead poisoning in St. Louis are Black. Black children make over 10 times more visits to the ER every year than white kids. That really, it's. I use the word untenable a lot, but it really is. You cannot continue to harm one group, one population group like this over and over and over again.
Tara says that the people most impacted by environmental racism and the organizations that advocate for them directed the focus of the Environmental Racism in St. Louis report.
Air pollution leads to asthma. Inefficient homes causes more air pollution, things like that. Sierra Club came to us with those issues. Dutchtown South Community Corporation, illegal dumping is a huge focus of theirs. And illegal dumping and vacancy, they really go hand in hand. When you have a lot of vacancy, people dump, and then more people leave. So then more people dump, and it's a circular thing. And Action and Arch, their issues largely surround about housing. Actually, Dutchtown as well focuses on housing and issues for tenants. So people that live in homes where you have landlords that sometimes are less than. And so those issues, mold in housing, lead in housing, all of these things. So it really was a client driven where their interests were. And it all comes about to the environment in which people live, whether it's inside their house or outside their house, and the overall effect it has on their health.
The report is divided into sections that touch on health conditions like lead poisoning and asthma, environmental risk factors like mold and air pollution, as well as quality of life concerns like home energy costs, healthy food access, vacant properties, and illegal trash dumping. In addition to sobering statistics, the report drives home the real impacts of environmental issues through the stories of St. Louis residents. It shares the story of a mother who discovered that her daughter was exposed to lead in her grandmother's North City home, only after she was released from being incarcerated. It tells of landlords who ask residents to paint over mold or even serve eviction notices when they speak up about black mold on their walls and ceilings. And it explains how electric companies offer little help when bills are so high that residents avoid using a heater during winter or avoid using their stove or oven to cook meals for their family. Even though these stories weren't surprising to the advocates who contributed to the report, Tara was taken aback by some of the policies that underlie the issues.
What surprised me, frankly, in researching why mold was an issue and what can be done about it, is that mold is not an issue in the occupancy code. So it is not a code violation to have an entire wall full of mold. So if an inspector walks into a house, sees that an entire wall is covered with mold, cannot do anything about it. It cannot force the landlord to fix it, cannot do anything. It's not an issue for the housing inspectors. So regardless of what they would want to say or would want to do, they don't have the legal power to say or do anything about it. If it were a code violation to have mold in a home, then people would have to fix it. Then people that own the properties would have to fix it. But instead, the people who live there, the tenants, just have to make the choice to either live with it or break their lease, lose their security deposit, and ruin their credit. Similarly, what I found shocking was with respect to illegal dumping. A very, very simple, basic thing with illegal dumping. There are statutes on the books that allow the circuit attorney, and in some cases, the attorney general's office, to prosecute illegal dumpers with up to a $20,000 fine. Instead of using those statutes, the only person that enforces illegal dumping is the city attorney's office. Those are the only people that enforce it. And under our Constitution, they are prohibited from assessing fines for over $500, which means that it is often less expensive to dump and risk a fine if you do get caught, which again is a low risk, than to pay the fees to actually dispose of your waste properly. So there's actually a financial incentive to dump. And there are statutes on the books to change that, but they're just not being enforced. And that's wild to me. And illegal dumping is rampant in this city. So that's not in the report, but it stems from the report. And I find that shocking personally.
But just as policies can contribute to neglect of housing and neighborhood conditions, policies can also strengthen code enforcement and tenants' rights.
So for illegal dumping, they could enforce the laws using the statutes that actually have teeth. I know that if I was at risk for a $20,000 fine, I'd be a lot less likely to take that risk than if it was just a $500 slap on the wrist. With vacancy, Legal Services of Eastern Missouri has an amazing program to combat vacancy in St. Louis. Our clinic actually works with them on that as well, where we use existing statutes on the books to bring suit against derelict landowners who own vacant properties. And we use nuisance, receivership, and abandoned housing act laws to use the courts to take the properties from those negligent landowners and put them in the hands of neighborhood associations and others who are willing and required to fix them up and make them useful properties.
These are just some examples of policies and approaches that can be implemented sooner rather than later. Other issues, like air pollution, might take more time to address, but Tara suggests the solutions are within reach.
Could the city get more air monitors and put them around the city in various places, in various areas, including in majority Black areas, so we can figure out exactly what the air pollution levels are in various areas of the city and what toxins we're looking for, so that we know what to do to make the city a safer place? Yes. Can we improve green spaces? Can we take vacant lots and turn them into green spaces? Create urban farms and incentivize urban farms to bring fresh food while cooling down neighborhoods and increasing green spaces. There are a whole host of things that can be done.
Catherine says that Action St. Louis is building power to achieve similar changes by proposing an agenda called the People's Plan St. Louis.
One of the platforms that have been added in there is making St. Louis home. It's universal housing, environmental justice, and livability for all St. Louisans. People can go to peoplesplanstl.org and get the information behind that. And it's about 15 to 20 grassroots organizations that anchored. It's a coalition of all of them. The plan just grew out of years of findings, proposals, shared visions. Environmental racism in St. Louis is one of the reports that is included in that People's Plan.
The Making St. Louis Home platform draws inspiration from the Environmental Racism in St. Louis report, with demands such as increase air pollution monitoring, conduct a citywide dumpster survey to ensure equitable placement, and designate mold as a substandard condition within the building or health and safety codes. When we interviewed Catherine and Madison on January 25th, they said that the report hadn't received as much attention from local officials as they'd like. But on January 28th, Missouri Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush referenced the report in a press conference when she introduced the Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection Act of 2021, a bill that she co-sponsored with Massachusetts Democratic Senator Ed Markey and Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth. The statistic Cori cited from the report: Black children in St. Louis are 10 times more likely to visit an emergency room for asthma and 2.4 times more likely to have lead in their blood than white children. The new federal bill is meant to be a tool to prioritize the 40% of Biden administration environmental funding that is allocated to communities most impacted by environmental racism. Tara says that local policy changes will also require that St. Louis City officials make environmental justice a priority by allocating funding toward these solutions.
It's too expensive not to do. The problem is more expensive than the solutions. All these kids going to the ER every year when we don't provide access to easy health care, and it's the hospitals that are bearing the cost because people without money can't afford to go to the ER. The problem is more expensive than the solution. Invest in the future and it always pays itself back. That's what I would say.
Madison and Catherine agree, saying that the money is there, but might need to be redistributed.
What would it look like if we took the chance to take that money, reallocate it into things that have been proven to work in places that where results have been seen to happen? And that's millions of dollars. Spend over $200 million to the carceral system, policing, jails, courts, etc. Yet a lot of people argue that they don't feel any safer at all. We keep pouring money into the things that don't work. So when people tell me there's not enough money, I feel like I have very little patience sometimes, because I'm like, really? Because I was looking at the city budget and I see where some of this money is. And I think a lot of us do. It just, if you're not going to listen to the people who put you into office and a lot of what they want, and you're instead going to allocate money other ways, then it's not necessarily a problem of the money not being there. It's just a problem of not really listening to the will of the people who are really impacted by all the decisions that are being made.
We're not asking for more money because the money is there. What we're asking is to redistribute the money that we already have, redistribute the resources, and put them towards things that would benefit the community and not just certain people. Because no one blinks an eye when we constantly defund schools or we constantly take from education budgets, when we spend less than 1% on human services as opposed to what we spend on things that have not shown to keep us safe. Policing doesn't keep us safe. Strong communities keep us safe. And we need to reinvest in our communities, and the money is there.
If advocates like Madison and Catherine can succeed in making environmental justice a top legislative and budget priority for the city, the next step will be to implement comprehensive changes to repair past harms. So up next, we learn how the environmental justice movement can be made more inclusive, the challenges that come with balancing enforcement with equity, and how the report's recommendations will help foster a better environment for the next generation.
Hey everyone, it's Lauren again. The different groups of people working on the report have their own understanding and unique connections to environmental issues, but there are residents in impacted communities who don't have the information to understand the importance of environmental justice work. This is why Catherine believes educating people of color is the next step in making the environmental justice movement more inclusive.
When people think of environment, they think of the Green New Deal, or they think of recycling, or they think of reducing carbon, to say that's what the environment has been. That's maybe in the media. So a lot of people are thinking, this is about, people saving the earth. And all of this, it's tied in, but the environmental racism deals with making people understand the things that are affecting them on a daily basis, everyday lives. We know that there's a large amount of lead in a lot of these apartments in the inner city where Black people, people of color, poor people live, and they're not understanding how this is affecting their children, or just even the lack of trees being planted in certain areas, which would improve the air quality.
Helping communities understand how the environment can directly affect their everyday lives is a challenging effort. But Madison says having organizations like Arch City Defenders and Action St. Louis involved with the report helps bridge the gap.
The level of intentionality that I think inherently comes when you have not only Black-led organizations, but Black-led organizations that are actively working for Black futures. That is constantly the work. Then like, I feel like I assume that if I read a report from that lens, that I know that it's going to really be accounting for those who might not always be accounted for in these reports. I know it's not only going to be looking at one part of the city or one part of the county. I know it's going to really try and take this holistic view to show what's really going on. I think for people receiving it, if you see an organization that you know has been fighting for you or helping you or working for you in a way is a part of making this, and then you start reading it and you read these stories of people that sound just like you or things that you're going through, then it's easier for you to connect to that and easier for people to see themselves in it and to realize that they can be a part of this work and realize what injustices are being committed against them. Basically, it really just helps with the education and bridging that divide that can sometimes exist between some forms of activism and like the people who are really directly experiencing the problems, who are not always the people who have time to like be in an action or like to come to a Zoom meeting or to do things, people that are living it every single day.
But how can you continue to bridge the gap when the people you are trying to reach don't have access, and the pandemic is continuing to increase the divide we already see?
COVID has taken people's voices away because we're in a situation where we cannot have community meetings. We can't go to the local church, the local rec center, and talk about these issues and hear what people have to say. That is things that we were doing before COVID hit. With the digital divide, when we try to hold these meetings remotely, it doesn't work. I mean, we try, we do the best that we can, but with the digital divide, we can't make it happen. There are too many people in this city, too many Black people in the city that don't have access to the computers, to the high-speed internet, to everything that you need to make this a reality. So yes, the people that we need to listen to are Black people. The people we need to listen to are the people that are affected by it. But for the past, I don't even know how long we've been in this now, for the past decade that's been COVID, we have not been able to have these conversations or to hear these voices. And it's frustrating and it's disheartening.
And the decades of disinvestment in specific areas shows us exactly who we need to listen to and prioritize.
When we speak about, what happened in the areas of like Mill Creek Valley or those areas, these were areas that they knew that Black people were occupying. When they say the redlining maps, people were specifically told, don't invest in these areas because there are Black people in these areas. So when we are speaking about the people that we need to listen to, it's the people that occupy these areas, and the vast majority of the people in these areas, especially in these North St. Louis areas, are Black people.
For Madison, just listening to the average person's daily struggle can help with understanding environmental issues that can be intricate.
Environmental justice language sometimes can feel exclusive for people. Like even for me, like reading the report and going through the stuff, I'm like, oh, like this stuff does count as environmental racism. Like I think this is stuff that a lot of people just see as like my normal Tuesday, like people who are in this situation, it is their reality day to day. A lot of people don't necessarily realize like how great of an injustice this is to them, because people have been told that this is just the way it is. Your landlord's not going to fix anything and you just have to deal with it. This is where you live and the air quality is bad. There's nothing you can do. And so I think when we have these conversations about like environmental justice, it's good that we're having these types with the report that have stories from people. And then we have community meetings and stuff where we talk to people about what they're experiencing, because it like can take it away from that academic sense where I think some people can feel very disconnected. Like, I didn't study environmental justice. I don't know anything about this. Like, yes, you do, because it's your life. Like every day you are living in this environmental racism that has just been intentionally kind of like put upon you to hold you down.
The intentionality of economic and structural racism makes it even harder to balance enforcement with equity, especially when predominantly Black communities have been over surveillance for years.
We need to listen to the community to see what they want. Do you want these laws enforced more? Do you want more police looking for it or not? And that's where we look to for our guidance and for what we would promote. Now, changing the types of prosecutions, once they're caught, saying that illegal dumpers who are caught should face higher fines, that has nothing to do with increasing policing. It has to do with increasing prosecution against people that are harming minority communities.
For Catherine, a Black woman who has lived in these communities and understands the issues from a personal perspective, it's about investment and power.
I always relate back to re-envisioning what public safety looks like. And to me, it wouldn't be a distinction between, the over policing, because I don't even believe that's a job for the police. We don't need police to be out here enforcing code violations and things of that nature. That's the problem I think that we have right now, is having police in places where they're not needed. So to me, if we were truly investing in community, in human services and things of that nature, we wouldn't have so much of a need for these things. If we were investing in communities in North St. Louis instead of de-investing in them, we wouldn't have all of these, vacant lots, and we wouldn't have places where people feel like there is no repercussion for them to dump in neighborhoods filled with people that don't have a voice. And it comes from us taking the power from the people in these areas, and they're not being listened to. So no one cares what a poor Black person in North St. Louis says, because they don't believe that they have any power to say or do anything about what goes on.
So what role does Action St. Louis and Arch City Defenders play in pushing for the report's recommendations to be implemented? And how can the recommendations push elected leaders to do more?
The first step for us is really making sure that we're continuing to listen to community voices. So we're going to have a community survey that's going to be going out with the recommendations that we have, and basically giving people the opportunity to kind of rank them within specific either categories or by their level of importance to them, so we can get a better sense of kind of where people are and what people are thinking. And then having a community listening event where we're able to hear more about what, kind of get some confirmation there, making sure that the things that we came up with out of these community conversations do indeed reflect the community and what we want. From there, it's a matter of turning them into actual top 5 kind of most immediate demands, and then sending that to, either candidates or people and asking, do you sign on to this? These are issues that people care about and that are important and that are going to be a part of the conversation.
There are a lot of people who just don't know that these are things that can be changed. Once you have a group of people who are used to these conditions, there's a sense of apathy. People become apathetic and they don't think that things can change. And this is exactly how it is. There's definitely a paradigm shift going on in this country. There, is power in places that we have never seen before. And I think if we just grab on to this moment and bring as many people as we can with us, we have a huge opportunity to make those changes.
We asked them about what we can change now to create a better environment.
Some of these changes are short-term, some of these changes are long-term, and some of the harms are already permanent. So childhood lead poisoning, the children that were poisoned remain poisoned. If they suffered the effects, permanently have reduced IQs, permanently have all of these issues that are just not going to change. But we would have a healthier generation going forward once the changes were implemented. If you got rid of mold in people's houses, then yes, that would have an immediate effect on people's lives. People that move out of a house with mold infestation, they feel like they suddenly have a new pair of lungs. If you decided to invest in green spaces and plant more trees and whatnot in North St. Louis, trees take decades to mature. But over time, we would have a healthier, more beautiful and more sustainable North St. Louis, one where more people would want to move in and more people would want to invest in, and slowly it would improve. Same with vacancy and illegal dumping. You reduce vacancy, it reduces illegal dumping, and you could kind of reverse the cycle. There are very few things here where it would be an immediate change, but it would be an improvement. Instead of people's lives getting worse, they'd be getting better. And you continue to roll things back. And as the city becomes more beautiful and more inclusive and more healthy, then instead of losing population, our population would grow because it's someplace that people would want to come to and live in. We really need to improve the base of our city, improve its health and improve its beauty if we want it to survive and to thrive. And it needs to survive and thrive for all of us, not just the white folks.
Working toward justice is a daily struggle, but the hope for change keeps them going. So we asked them, what kind of environment are they hoping to create for the next generation?
truly equitable, sustainable, and inclusive one.
An environment where people truly and genuinely feel safe, where children feel safe to take a deep breath and not feel like they're going to have any trouble breathing, where Black and brown people can feel safe walking around, existing and living their lives and not having to worry about whether or not that's going to be a death sentence or something. This idea that people can have this real level of safety and security in the environment around them and where they live.
We need justice, we need equity. I would like our air and our soil and our water to just be overall clean. But until that happens, we should all be exposed to the same level of junk. Because until we're all exposed to the same level of nastiness, then we're not going to collectively do anything about it because we're not all collectively suffering from it. So until we suffer as one, we will not act as one. I want to see a future where we're all healthy and we're all safe. It's not going to be a perfect utopia, but at least a fair one.
This show is produced by me, Lauren Brown, and lead producer Jalianne Yang. You can find the Environmental Racism in St. Louis report by going to law.wustl.edu and clicking on the Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic tab. You can also find it on the Missouri chapter of the Sierra Club and Dutchtown South Community Corporation's website. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.